quick land acknowledgement and introduction for the guest speakers, and also we'll do the program overview for the JD MBA program at UBC Sauder. And also afterwards, the main part of today's session is to hear from our panelists, from our guest speakers about their experience from the program. And then at the end, we'll do questions from the audience. It'll be nice for you to ask them directly what your questions are. And then we'll do a quick summary and also some future events that you can join with us. All right, so we would like to acknowledge that UBC's Vancouver Point Grey campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. We would also like to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. All right, so for today in the room, we have a few guests. So there's Vivian Tran, as she said hello earlier to everybody. Hi. Yeah, so Vivian is the Director of Admissions and Recruitment for the Allard School of Law at UBC. And there's myself. I'm the Manager of Recruitment Admissions at UBC Sauder. And we also have two guest speakers that is going to be our panelists for today. So there's Grace, as she mentioned earlier, she has said hello. So Grace has graduated from the JD MBA program this year, I think in May. And we also have Gray. I'm not sure if Gray is online right now because he's currently doing, oh, Gray there you are. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, thanks.
You made it. Awesome. So Gray is a current student in the JD MBA program, and I will also give a short introduction about them so you can know more about them. So for Grace, Grace is currently an articulating student at the Strikeman Elliott LLP at Vancouver office. So it's one of Canadian premier business law firms. And Grace has completed her JD MBA program in May 2024. And prior to law school, she has pursued a Bachelor of Commerce at UBC Sauder and was a varsity athlete on the UBC rowing team throughout her undergrad degree. So that's Grace. And Gray here, he is a JD MBA candidate at UBC. Before pursuing his joint degree, Gray performed professionally as a musical theater performer across North America. And in his 1L summer, Gray worked at Dunton Canada LLP in the Vancouver office as the recipient of the Douglas Knowles Casey annual internship in the insolvency, where he has co-authored an article published in the 20th annual review of the insolvency law and Canada's leading insolvency law journal. In his 2L summer, Gray worked at Tory LLP in Toronto with a focus on corporate solicitor practices. Gray will return to Taurus LLP after graduating to continue developing his corporate practice. All right, so there's our guest speaker for today. And I guess without further ado, as I mentioned before, we will have a Q&A session at the end. But if you do have any questions throughout the session, feel free to, just type your questions in the chat box. And we have our team members monitoring the chats, and they will try to answer your questions as soon as possible. Okay, so I will kick off the session by doing a quick overview on the JD MBA program, just to let you know what curriculum you're going to be studying, what your 4 years look like for the JD MBA program. And I will focus on the MBA part, and then I will pass it on to Vivian to focus more on the JD part of the curriculum. Okay, so as you can see from the screen, from this 4-year full-time program, basically the JD MBA program will equip you with the tools to understand law from a perspective of business person and also to understand business from a perspective of a lawyer. So it's a combination of both sides of the world. And by gaining expertise in all angles of law, business, and management, you will be ready to succeed in a global economies where the ability to navigate the complexity of law and business. And so before and after graduation, the JD MBA student will benefit from the full support from our Business Career Center, which I'll just touch base on in just a little bit. On top of that, you will also get support from the Allard School of Law. So basically, you will receive support from both schools and both systems. And also it means that you will be getting twice the professional development opportunities. And usually the graduates from the JD MBA program, they will pursue rewarding careers in fields such as corporate law, investment banking, consulting, and venture capital. Okay, so I will move on to the next slide. So I'll tell you more about the MBA curriculum, which is one of the highlights of the curriculum is that in our MBA curriculum, in your, I would say in the second semester, you're going to have your career track or track courses. We call them track courses because they are tightly connected with the industries. So I'll just show you in a little bit. So right now we're offering 5 different career tracks. Technically we offer 6 because the 6th one is customized, which means that it's something that you can tailor for yourself. You can choose 2 or even more different tracks to take courses in. So right now we have track courses in climate, in finance, product and service management, innovation and entrepreneurship, technology and analytics. And it's very interesting because we have quite a few students in the custom track because everybody wants to be exposed to more industries and more knowledge just in case that if they want to change their career to a different field in the future. But these industries, we have the track champions, which are professors who have been working in these fields for many years, which means that you will have the resources from their network to introduce you, to people and the companies that you might want to work in the future. And on top of the career track courses, we also have a really exciting part of the MBA curriculum, which is the, I'll show you where it is. It's called the GIE, which is this part, the MBA Global Immersion Experience. So what that means is that our students will get a 2-week in-country experience to a global destination. So I think for last year, our students went to Chile, Santiago, they went to Cape Town, South Africa. They also went to Singapore. So in those 2 weeks, on top of also the traveling, the sightseeing and everything, the company visits, you also get the chance to work on a global consulting project, which means that you're going to, meet a company in those destinations, meet with their staff, their management, and work on a solution of the problem of their company, which will really expand your perspective to a global sense. And before you start the consulting project, you will be informed about the availability, like where you can go, which are the projects you can choose, and you will have the choices, and you can give your ranking of the places that you want to go. So it's really exciting opportunity for our students to get the experience to meet those companies overseas and get to put the consulting experience on their resume, which is a really exciting part of the program. And on top of the GIE experience, as I mentioned before, the resources that you're going to be getting from our Business Career Center. So there's a couple things that you will get on top of the programming that they design for all our students, which is the workshops, your career development week, and also some of the skill development workshops. There's also constant recruitment events and also employer alumni networking events. And the most valuable part of this resources that you will be receiving one-on-one professional career coaching. So if any of you have worked with a career coach before, you know that, usually if you look for a coach on the market, it usually costs you probably more than $100 per hour. But in the program, you will be receiving free career coaching with our Business Career Center. So it's like seeing a therapist, but it's for your career because they know you, personally, they work on your potential, they work on your strengths, weakness, and make sure that you're connected with the industry and also the people that you should be talking to after they know better about you, like what kind of jobs you want to work on, what kind of skills you're trying to develop. So make sure you take advantage of these resources if you're in the MBA program. It's a really valuable resource to have. And on top of the Business Career Center resources, we also have another really good, I would say, advantage, which is the GNAM network. So the GNAM is short for Global Network of Advanced Management. Basically, how it works is that as an MBA student, you will have the chance to take some of the courses from any of the partner school in the same network. So the network is made of 32 leading business schools around the world. As you can see some of the logos there, we have Yale School of Management, we have Oxford University, and they're all in the same network. UBC is the only Canadian school that's part of this network. So on top of that global immersion experience, you also have the chance to take courses from any of the partner schools in the GNAP network to expand your global perspective. That's the highlights of the MBA program, the main portion of the program. So now I'll pass it on to Vivian to just touch base on the, the JD part of the program, and then we'll answer all the questions that you might have after the session.
Thanks for joining us on this JD MBA dual degree presentation. So I'm going to be presenting on the UBC JD program. This is a beautiful shot of actually what it kind of looks like today. It's super sunny. So if you see flashes of light, it's actually from the sun coming through the office window. It does at times look this beautiful on campus. So why Allard Law? The Allard Law School is always ranked as one of the top 5 law schools in Canada. So it's an industry-leading institution in Canada with over 65 faculty members from all over the globe, many of whom have won awards for their work. So you really are joining a community of thought leadership in law in Canada, both locally, nationally, and internationally. Like I alluded there's like opportunities for work on every different level. And the Allard School of Law is a world leader in feminist legal studies, Asian legal studies, and Indigenous studies. There are over 80 upper year electives to choose from, so you could kind of shape your own education at Allard, including new courses in things like robotics and society and cyberspace law. Some of the concentrations you'll be exposed to at Allard include environmental and natural resource law, business law, social justice, and Indigenous legal studies. One of the things that really strikes me about the program are some of the externships, so some of the experiential learning components that you have when you're a student at Allard. And something that's quite striking about this, as you can see from the list, is it allows your students to kind of get real-world experience, but in a way that contributes to groups and community members that are often underserved by legal services. So you can see there's the Indigenous Community Legal Clinic, there is the Law School Legal Advice Program, the Innocence Project, and the Rise Women's Legal Center. So it's a great way for our students to get experience in the field, but also contribute to their communities and serve community members that might be underserved by the legal society. We also have a career service office at Allard, as Patricia was mentioning, and so they're there to kind of assist students with their options in terms of their careers. They host recruiting events and on-campus interviews. And they also have a dedicated public interest coordinator. We have one of the highest articling placement rates in Canada. Over 99% of our class of 2023 got their articles within 9 months of graduation. And then a good track record as well. You can see between 2019 and 2023, over 97% of our alumni secured articles within 9 months of graduation. A little bit about the application process. So some of you might be familiar with this, but when you apply to the JD MBA program, you're applying obviously both to the MBA program and to the JD program at Allard. And at Allard, you would be applying basically under one of these 3 categories: general, discretionary, Indigenous. And so in the general category, this is kind of our largest category for applicants. And so if you have these kind of we publish these medians, and now it's just a median, which I have to just tell everyone that this is like, if you're below these medians, it doesn't mean don't apply. These are just medians and not like cutoffs, okay? So just remember that. Now, so if you are kind of close to the median of like an 84% GPA and a 166 LSAT, the general category might be kind of a good category for you to consider applying to. The 12 of the worst credits are excluded from your GPA calculation. And for the LSAT, we take the best scores. So if you take multiple attempts, we'll be looking at your best scores. And for the September 2025 entry, we will consider the January 2025 LSAT. And then there's a series of questions, open-ended questions that will constitute your personal statement in the general category. Now, there is also the discretionary category. So this is a category that considers students that might have faced hardship or difficulties or had special needs that might have meant they did not meet some of the admissions thresholds that you see in the general category. So if you see like that you're kind of quite below some of those admissions thresholds in the general category, you might consider, and there was extenuating circumstances behind that, you might consider applying under the discretionary category. So same materials are required. We need your transcripts for your GPA, LSAT, and then the personal statement. It's kind of an expanded personal statement for you to describe maybe what happened in your life journey to law school. In this category, we also require 2 references. So, we prefer one to be academic and one to be professional, but if you've been many, many years out of school and you don't have any professors that remember you anymore, it's fine to do 2 professional references. Then we have the Indigenous category. So Indigenous people of Canada can apply under this category. Same kind of general requirements as the other 2 categories. We need a GPA, LSAT score. We need proof of ancestry, Indigenous ancestry, and we will prioritize candidates that are involved or committed to Indigenous communities and organizations and tend to use their legal training to advocate for Indigenous concerns and interests. Now, a parallel process next to our 3 categories is the Black student application process. So this is a voluntary process for Black students to be evaluated. So it just expedites their applications to a file review committee that's primarily Black. And this is in recognition that Black students are underrepresented in law schools as well as in the legal profession. So participation is voluntary. And the important thing to remember is we will basically assess students under this BSAP process under the same rigorous standards as any one of our admissions categories. No additional documents are required, but we do encourage students to reflect on your relationship with Black excellence in your personal statements and be thoughtful about what Black excellence means to you. So quick application timeline here. So mid-September, our applications have opened. So they are currently open right now. And note our application deadline is December 1st, 2024 for the September 2025 entry. So it's coming up soon. Like I said before, we will accept the January 2025 writing of the LSAT for the September 2025 entry cohort. But do remember that you need to submit your application by December 1st. If you have further questions about the JD program, we do have a webinar coming up kind of closest to our application deadline. So feel free to screenshot or scan this code. It's going to be a session with one of our current JD student ambassadors. And it's a webinar, so hopefully wherever you're from, you can join us. We're going to get into the panel sessions. So Gray and Grace are going to join us and share their experiences about being in the JD MBA program. So if you guys have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and then we will answer them as they come in, or feel free to use the raise hand feature as well if you'd like to ask a question live. I have a few kind of like starting questions just to get us started, but we'll start taking questions from the group quite shortly. So a question for both of you, Gray and Grace. What led you to decide to pursue 2 professional graduate programs, so a joint degree program like the JD MBA?
I can jump in to start us off. I'm going to get confused with this Grace and Gray, so I'll try and listen carefully. So I decided, I guess, to do the MBA program after I was already in law school. So I had decided to go to law school during my undergrad, and I chose to go to UBC pretty much for all the reasons that Vivian just explained. It's a wonderful law school. It's top tier. It's beautiful. The faculty and staff and the programs are amazing. So I had already kind of made that decision. And then once I was in 1L, I was started thinking about things that further opportunities, further growing opportunities, both in terms of my career in the future and also just in my own learning. And the MBA came up. I had known some people that had done it before. So I kind of went out and asked people, like, is this something I should do? I went to a session very similar to this as a student not that long ago. And ultimately, it came down to just the amazing opportunity I think there is to combine like 2 very important things that interlap a lot. I knew I kind of wanted to go into corporate law, and law school is wonderful and is excellent at teaching you about the law. But I think sometimes there's not quite as much about thinking about the business side of it, and doing the MBA is just like such a wonderful way to have that additional perspective, additional kind of way of thinking, of looking at legal problems. So for me, I was primarily wanting to be a lawyer. I'm trying to be a lawyer. I'm articling right now. So I did the MBA as a way to make me, I guess, be a better lawyer, and also open so many doors in the future. If I want to go in-house, I've heard from in-house lawyers that, you know, so many that I've talked to have said, I wish I had an MBA. It's so smart that you're doing that. Like all the time I'm in these conversations with people talking about business things, and I wish I could speak their language. So I think that was a primary reason that I wanted to do it. And then also, even just in my experience in a traditional law firm, I'm dealing with things that I learned in the MBA like every day. I'm looking at financial statements all the time. We're talking about the bigger business picture. So I've found that my reasons leading me to do the MBA have turned out to be true, which is excellent for me. But I'll pass it over to Gray. Maybe he has some things to add.
Thanks, Grace.
Nice. I think my plan for my education was similar to Grace's, and the way it played out. I started just in the law program like Grace, and then I considered applying for the MBA in my first year of law for similar reasons as well, to kind of broaden opportunities in the future. And personally, I'm not sure if I want to stay in law, and I know having an MBA, both degrees are very versatile and very well respected in a lot of industries. And so for me, the combination of the two is quite unique and does open up a lot of doors for down the road, whatever I choose to do beyond law. And within law, I think it's, again, a great advantage, as Grace was saying, just being able to contextualize these legal transactions that operate in these business spheres, because law and business are so intertwined. I think it really gives me a leg up in communicating, understanding, and dealing with these kind of corporate files. And I'm also doing more corporate work, and so it's a huge advantage in my work that I did this past summer at Torrey's in Toronto. But yeah, I think very similar to Grace in terms of why I wanted to pursue the dual degree.
Okay, that's wonderful. And actually, both your stories highlights the idea that there's actually different pathways for admission into the JD MBA program. You can either apply at the same time as you're applying for the JD program in your first year, or you can apply during your first year in the JD program, because the JD MBA program starts with the JD program first. So there's several admissions pathways, but just remember the JD deadline is soon. So if you're planning to start in September 2025, keep that December 1st, 2024 deadline in mind. And then you do still have that first year to think about the MBA program. Great. So let's go into like how your admissions process was. What did you both do in your preparation to apply to the JD and ultimately JD MBA program?
Yeah, so for the JD program, I did a lot of LSAT prep, which was, for me, wasn't the best experience, but it was for sure necessary. And I think for the LSAT, the amount of time you put in, there's a strong correlation between the time you put in and results. I think it's a test that the more you practice and the more you get comfortable with the questions, the better you can do. So I highly recommend doing that. And what's great about that is that prep work translates directly to the prep work that I did for my MBA, because for the GMAT that you have to write for the MBA, I think there maybe Vivian or Patricia, you can speak on. I think you can waive it if there's under certain circumstances, but I wrote the GMAT as well, and 2/3 of that GMAT test is the same 2 sections as the LSAT. So I didn't have to study as much or as hard for the GMAT. So both, yeah, it was good prep work to do to apply to the MBA. For the GMAT, I did have to brush up on some math stuff from high school, and it's all the math that you've probably learned in high school. It's not complicated technically, but it's a bit tricky in applying those kind of foundational skills. But I definitely had to do some prep with that. And before starting the program, I think that the MBA side recommends they offer some courses to get you kind of to the level where they want you to start at the program. And I did some of those as well.
Awesome.
Sorry to interrupt a little bit, because I saw a question that's directly to Gray for how long you prepare for the LSAT.
Yeah, I think total it was like 2 months. And I was pretty strict with my schedule, so I would do kind of a loose 9 to 5 of studying. But towards the end of it, I was doing at least one practice exam a day, probably two. And I think I did probably, I might have done too much. I think it varies depending on the person. But in my experience, again, the practice did translate to a better score because I tested myself before and after. But I think I probably did around 40 to 50 practice exams. But I think it differs. And I'm not sure, Grace, what your experience was studying for the LSAT, if it was as horrible as mine, but
Yeah, I'll jump in on the specific LSAT point. I'll give some hope to people. I wrote it twice, so it's okay if the first one doesn't go amazing, or you don't quite get the score that you want. Fortunately, Allard takes your best score, so if you want to write it again, it's okay. I did okay on the first one, but I definitely didn't score where I wanted to score. So I used that opportunity to, I think, kind of revamp my studying plan, something a little bit similar to what Gray was talking about. I think before I was trying to do way too many things at once. I was like studying, working, taking courses in the summer. I was on the rowing team. It was a bit chaotic. So I would say, like, if you can try and like give yourself as much dedicated study time and sort of treating that as your like primary role. And if you can't do that, then just give yourself more time. So, it's probably gonna like, don't be like, I'm gonna write the LSAT next month and I'm also gonna work and I'm gonna do this or whatever. It might be a bit more stressful. So if you're gonna also work and do other things, I would recommend extending the period of time that you're gonna study. But definitely agree with the point about practice tests. I think that was the best way that I learned as well. So that was the point on the LSAT. I did get a GMAT waiver, so I think Patricia can probably speak to that. I did go to Sauder for my undergrad, so I had a business undergrad from Sauder, which I think assisted in getting that waiver. Part of the issue was also that I applied extremely late in 1L. I was not really thinking about the program early enough, so hopefully you all are thinking about it earlier than I was. I would encourage you to think about it not during 1L exams, because that will create a bit of a tight timeline. But I was able to get the GMAT waiver, which was nice. But then I think the other parts of the admission for the MBA program specifically, I think there's a video and some other questions. And I actually found those quite helpful for me in also deciding whether I wanted to do the program. I think some of the questions are quite broad, just like, why do you want to do the dual program? What do you plan to do with it? And I think those are like really important questions to think about when you're doing the dual program specifically and thinking, how am I going to use this? What's the purpose behind it? Because it is, a big time and financial commitment. It's not the path that everyone takes. So I do encourage you to really like think about it, talk to as many people as you can. Coming to sessions like this is fantastic. I'm sure Gray is the same as me, that we would be happy to chat with you on one-on-one as well, or reach out to any of the alumni. I think that was a big part of me preparing specifically to do the dual program. Just getting as much information as possible, especially from senior people in law, and being like, is this helpful? And everyone that I talked to said that it was, but it's good to kind of have those reasons before applying to that MBA portion.
That's great. And a few things, like there's a question that's come up that's kind of a bit related to the kind of the preparation process, which is someone's wondering like what's the best time to apply for the MBA, before or like kind of at the same time as applying for the JD program, or after starting the JD, which is what both of you had done. Any thoughts on like what's the ideal time to start thinking about the MBA?
yeah,
Go ahead.
Thanks, Grace. Again, I think similarly to Grace, from what I'm gleaning from what she's saying is, I was really only thinking about the law program when I applied, and it was only in my first year that I started to think about the MBA. But if you're already thinking about the MBA, I think that's a great start, because I wasn't in this position. I was thinking about the MBA during my law school, which is tough because you are so involved in school, and it's difficult to balance those priorities if you're writing the GMAT during your first year of law. So I think just from like a scheduling standpoint, I think it might be a little bit easier to think about applying both at the same time. So if you have that summer before applying to dedicate to writing these tests and thinking about kind of your plan and all the application materials, because it was a bit of a struggle to balance that with my first year of law, trying to kind of do all those MBA admission elements. But Grace, I'm not sure if it was similar for you.
Yeah, I think I would echo the same thing as apply or at least start preparing your application materials, even if you're like not quite ready to hit submit on it. If even you prepare those materials kind of like leading into 1L, maybe you've gotten accepted into Allard in May and you're going to start in 1L, like sort of spending that summer preparing, thinking about it. And then I think, I mean, Patricia can answer this, but I think there's several cycles of MBA admission. It's not the same as law where there's just one date. I think it's like maybe fall, January, May. Is that still the case? Yeah. Something like that. So I think as early as possible. I was also told the earlier apply, the more scholarships are available. So that was a downfall for me applying on the very last deadline. I'm always like, apply earlier. But also I acknowledge that it takes a bit of time to like kind of make the final commitment and decision to do it. So as long as you're preparing your materials earlier and you're not trying to do it in April while you're writing exams, you'll be in a better position than I was. But also if that's you, you can still pull it off. So you can, earlier is better, but worst case scenario, you can do it right up, I think, until May of 1L.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add on to that, like from an admissions perspective, of course, if you're thinking about MBA already, then do it earlier than later, just because, you know, it's a peace of mind. And because when you're applying to the MBA, you're automatically considered for the merit scholarship. But, you know, of course, the earlier you apply, the more seats are available, the more scholarships are available, there's more chance for you to get a scholarship. But you do have until like first week of May to submit your application. Some people like want to make sure the applications are good, so they wait until the last minute to submit. But really depending on like what's your, I would say, behavior. Like, you know, some people want to get things done earlier. So from a like admissions perspective, we would recommend that you do it earlier than later. But I'll mention about the deadlines and everything after we finish the panel discussion.
Mm-hmm. I think I saw Jeffrey put his hand up. Would you like to ask a question live, Jeffrey?
Hi, yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Firstly, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to come out and host this information session. I was just wondering if there are any possible situations where potential candidates that have gotten into the JD MBA program throughout their studies may have sort of veered into maybe focusing on one path, sort of wanting to do just the MBA and not so much the JD, or just focusing on the JD and not so much the MBA. I know some students might may experience sort of a drift or a shift in focus during their studies, and I was wondering if that's ever happened or if there's any leeway or options for students.
Oh, that's a good question. Thankfully, it's been rare, actually, that students decide not to go through with one program or the other, but it's always evaluated on a case by case, and it kind of depends on how far I think you've gotten in one program. But because you are evaluated by the criteria in terms of your academics in each program, like which criteria you have finished. So theoretically speaking, it is possible that, let's say, you started in JD and that's all you wanted to do, then it is kind of theoretically possible. But we would want to kind of hear from you and understand your rationale for wanting to not continue with the other half of the program. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Or has it gone the other way where someone wanted to possibly do the MBA but not do the JD? Is that possible, or?
I believe that is also possible because like there's no, like there are people that drop out of JD programs. It's quite rare in the Allard program, just because it's like so competitive to get in the first place. But like it is possible. You just won't continue the program. That's all it is.
Oh, okay, awesome. Thank you.
Grace, Gray, anything to add to that?
No, I think that covers it. I think you don't get the benefit of the slightly reduced credits that you get under the dual program. So I think you'll have to just finish all of the credits required for the full-time MBA or the full-time JD. You don't get to cross the credits. I would encourage you to kind of think about it though. You don't want to have to pay a bunch of tuition and then drop out of one of the programs.
Certainly you don't want to do all of 1L and then decide.
Yeah. Also, it's not fun. Like, don't do 1L if
not.
you're like gonna not do it after. But it sounds like worst case scenario. Sounds like there's options.
Yeah. I see Stephanie has her hand up.
Yeah, thanks so much for all the information. I was just wondering about like scholarships to the JD program. I know it was mentioned for MBA, but like, is it helpful to apply earlier for the JD program as well for scholarships? And when do most scholarship offers come out for JD?
Yeah, so we do have scholarships, entry and also donor scholarships for the JD program. We don't always allocate those right at the time of admissions. We kind of want to see more of the admissions pool early. So it's possible you might get an offer of admission, but like the scholarship offer might come like a little bit later. Whereas with the Sauder admissions process, they would offer the scholarship at the time of admission. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Yeah, it does. And are the scholarships based on your personal statement and LSAT score and GPA as well? You don't have to submit any like other documents?
Most scholarships are automatically considered. And so you can actually see like a full listing of scholarships, both like merit-based and kind of donor-based. And some of them are like kind of specific in terms of the criteria. And it would mention specifically if you need to make an application, but most are automatic. So if you just Google like Allard JD scholarships, you'll see a full range of scholarships. Like we offer over $1 million in scholarships for both entry, continuing, so second and third year, as well as a bursary program.
Awesome. Okay, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Welcome. Oh, thanks, Gray. Gray just put the link up, so that's helpful. Okay, so let me take a look here. There's a bunch of questions that came in on the chat, so I want to make sure we're looking at that.
Jared.
So this, like, I don't know, Grace or Gray, if you had any work experience going into the program, but so Jared's asked a question, could everyone speak to the average work experience that most students have entering the dual program? So maybe let's hear from Grace and Gray first, if you worked before or did you enter without work experience?
Yeah, go ahead, Grace.
Grace and Gray, it's tough. I did not have any work experience beyond just working through the summers in my undergrad, but I went directly from graduating undergrad right into 1L and then right into the MBA. So I had no work experience. I think sometimes this is a question for students. I've had people ask because typically there is a required work experience for MBA students for the full-time program, but I believe they do not have that same requirement for the JD MBA.
Yeah, and I did have work experience, so it's good to kind of get the dual perspective, but I worked for 4 years. Mind you, it was in performing a musical, so not too transferable to business. Well, that's not true. I learned that that's not true. But for me, I think that work experience didn't really prove valuable to the JD portion, but in the MBA, I think it did, and I really leveraged that work experience, and my classmates leveraged their work experience to kind of contribute to the conversations and contribute to discussions in class and on assignments and pulling from that experience. I don't, obviously, Grace didn't have an experience, so it's not essential. And I think you learn from, the great thing about the MBA, I think, is learning from all these people with all these different backgrounds, and that includes people who didn't work, have a fresh perspective. So I think it's just you bring yourself and your unique background to the table, and I think that's one of the coolest parts of the MBA. But yeah, but I definitely did. I brought some of the stuff that I learned to the program and discussions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a very important question. It's good that we have two examples here. So typically speaking, for MBA programs, there is a hard requirement for 2 years of work experience. But because we know in the JD MBA program, like there's a lot of students in that program are planning to be lawyers, right? So there's kind of a direct path into a career. At times that 2-year work experience can be waived for JD students. Great, thanks for sharing your experiences. And let's take a look here. So that's kind of admission question. I can quickly answer that. So there's like a question about like, what's the meaning of the 84% GPA? Because in Ontario, we use like kind of 4.0 or 3.8 or things like that. So you can actually convert your GPA to the 100% scale at Allard by just Googling Allard GPA calculator, and you'll actually have like a little calculator where you can input what your current GPA, whether it's like a 4.0 scale or something else, and then it'll spit out what the 100% average is. Jeffrey has a question.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, can you just hear me just to double check? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was just wondering about the work experience. Apart from working part-time or full-time over the summer or during the fall seasons, would it be beneficial to sort of include any sort of business experience if you made a business, or if you're working in a business or anything like that you created on your own in the application, or just maybe I want to maybe ask Grace or Gray if that's maybe a benefit to the application process.
Yeah, I can jump in. Sure, and then Patricia can probably speak from the actual application point of view. I think like absolutely 100% talk about that and talk about what you learned and your experience. I think also beyond the application, that would be extremely valuable to take into the MBA. I think Gray kind of touched on this, but a lot of what you learn in the MBA is not just like a listed curriculum. It's meant to be learning from each other, learning about your own experiences, applying what you learned in the program to your own experiences. Like, how could you have worked on your business better, or maybe you're still working on it. How can you improve it? Those sorts of things. So I think taking that experience into the program and also into your application is for sure a good idea.
Mhm,
Yeah, I
yeah, I
think-
can. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Gray.
I think you're able to highlight those experiences in the application. I think the video essay would be a great point to do that. So there's definitely room for you to talk about those experiences, and I agree, for sure, talk about them.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. Like from admissions perspective, usually for a standalone MBA application, the work experience only start counting after you graduated from your bachelor's, and it has to be full-time. But because there's no specific work experience requirement for the JD MBA, so any work experience, like it's worth mentioning, especially it's not just about what you have done, it's about the skills that you've developed, throughout this experience, and what you have learned and what you have reflected from those experiences. Definitely mention them in your video essay and also the written essay.
Right, keep those questions coming. I have one prepared question I want to ask Grace and Gray. Starting to sound like a sitcom or something. There should be a TV show. But one question is like, how did you find the transition from the law program to the MBA program? As we know, law starts first, so you do first year JD and then you do first year MBA. What was that transition like for you?
I'd say the two programs are very, very different in a couple aspects. The first being just the kind of style of evaluation in law. I would in first year, at least, I think in most, well, not some of the upper year classes, no, but in first year it's all 100% exams, which I'm not used to. So that it's just a unique way of approaching school and approaching studying for those exams. And then going into the MBA, it's basically sprinkled with a bunch of different assignments, 5%, 10%, 20%. So that for me was a definite kind of shift in how I approach studying and approach time management and organization. I found that in law, there's a lot of, in the first year of the law program, there's a lot of opportunity to kind of play catch up, because it's basically self-directed. You have to keep on top of your readings, but there's no one kind of evaluating your knowledge up until the very end. So if you want, you could cram all your readings toward the very end, which I don't recommend. But in the MBA, that's not possible, because there's like 3 different evaluations every week. So you really have to keep on top of your studying and your reading and your work. So for me, that was a huge shift. And the second shift that I noticed was just kind of the style of work in law. It's very independent, very individual. And in the MBA, it's very much group work based, which comes with its benefits and its challenges. And so that was also a very kind of stark transition between the two, and learning how to all of a sudden interact with people and work with people when you really don't do that as much in the law program.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Gray said. There's definitely a significant difference in how you're learning day to day. And it can feel at sometimes like 1L can be more intense in some ways, and the MBA can be more intense in some ways when you have assignments due every single day. It's just like the pace is a lot faster than in 1L, but maybe perhaps like the overall material is more challenging, or just approaching a 100% final can be a bit more challenging. I would say also on the group work, 100% big difference there. And then also kind of on that point, I think in the MBA, it's a little bit easier to some extent. I don't want to say to like hide or like skate by, but you can, in theory, do that a little bit more in the MBA. Like you're in group projects. If you just like don't want to contribute a lot, like someone else in your group's going to pick up the slack, or, if you like, oh, whatever, I'll just submit a crappy 5% assignment. Like there's room for that. Obviously in law, there is not, it's a 100% final. It will be obvious if you don't do well. And so I think that kind of requires some initiative and maturity in how you approach the MBA program. Like you can certainly not put in a ton of effort and get through it, and you just will not get out what you came to get out of it. So you sort of need to be approaching it with that mentality of being like, I'm here because I really want to learn. I want to dive in. I want to get as much experience from my classmates. So like go to all the networking, make sure you're, forming study groups and contributing to those group projects in meaningful ways, and like putting lots of effort into your assignments. I think that's a big difference from law school, where you kind of have that pressure at the end of being like, oh, like obviously I need to study really hard for this exam. It can feel at times that you can let it slip in the MBA. So being really diligent about that, because it really is what you're going to put in is what you're going to get out. And I think I did a good job in hindsight, like looking at that and being like, I really dove in, probably too far in some ways. But I got so much out of it, and so much out of the relationships that I built with my classmates in the MBA. Every assignment, I can remember a lot of them. And even like the small 5% ones, I'll be like, those are the ones you learn from, even though they seem like not a big deal. So I think kind of having that mentality a little bit going into the MBA is important. And that kind of comes back to your purpose for doing the dual program and kind of being very concrete in what that is. And that will help you kind of when you deal with those intense deadlines to sort of remind yourself what the bigger picture is.
So I have a question for you both is, how did your participation in the dual degree program impact your career trajectories? Because like we detailed in the presentations, there's 2 career centers you basically have access to in the program. And, Grace, you're already on your way, but Gray, you already have like your options already settled before you finish the program. So I think the audience would really benefit from this kind of discussion on how this dual degree program impacted your careers.
Yeah, from discussions that I've had with the dual degree alumni, I think most, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most do end up in law after graduation. I think because Grace and I, considering we both started with the JD, I think potentially that was always the path we were looking at. But for me, the MBA is really there. Well, first in 2 aspects. I think it really does help in the application process, in the law recruitment process. I think it definitely gives you a leg up, and I think employers really respect the dual degree. But I think for me, potentially more importantly, is just that down the line option, not knowing really what I want to do past law. And Grace mentioned going in-house. I've heard that dual degree is great for that transition into in-house down the line, because it's just they value that business background and expertise. But yeah, so I always kind of knew that I wanted to do law. There was never really a point for me personally, and I think it is a personal journey, where I considered just kind of going into a business position outside of school. But I'm certain I am sure that is always an option. And I think it was Jeffrey maybe who spoke about the idea of kind of dropping out. I would obviously recommend doing both. But I think you're not limited to law after you do this program, or you're not limited to business if you do this program. But in both industries, you are going to benefit from both experiences and both educational backgrounds. So I think both degrees will serve you no matter what you do. And I think the options are very limitless with those 2 degrees, law, business, or some kind of combination of both. So I think it sets you up really well, and there's no kind of one path.
I think I couldn't say it better myself, so I'm not gonna I would say exactly the same thing that Grace said. I think for myself too, think in law school, sometimes it feels a little bit like there's this like law firm trajectory path, and at the end of it is like partnership or some whatever it is. It sort of feels very linear, which is also a fantastic option and is available to whether you do it at the program or not. I think for me, kind of I knew also I wanted to be a lawyer, so I'm going down that pathway. I'm articling. I'll get called next year. And I think it's more like my vision in the future has just completely changed and is so much broader than what I thought before. I just know that there are so many more opportunities out there and so super unique roles, whether that's something that's available or something that I create for myself. I randomly now really want to be an entrepreneur one day, um, but using also as a lawyer though. So I think having just the experience has changed how I see it and how I can go after those opportunities. And then along with everything that Grace said, where it also gives you the credibility to do that. It gives you the ability to like speak the business language. It gives you the ability to actually understand business and law at the same time. Because I think there's not that many people that can do both. And they're both very unique but very connected areas to work in.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And one thing that you'll all, like anyone who's taken like a first year economics course, or if you take if you do take the MBA, you're going to learn about this concept of opportunity cost. Your opportunity cost as a student is going to be much lower than if you were like 5 years into your law career, I don't know, making like 150,000 or something. Taking a year in that time will cost you the opportunity costs of what your salary is then, $150,000. So that's something to consider as well. And it's one of the benefits of a program like this is that your opportunity costs when you're like still a student is much lower than when you are like 5 years down your career. And opportunity costs can come in many ways. It can come in terms of how much you're making at the time, but it can also come at a time like if you have other family obligations, that you have to take that time away. So something to consider, especially hopefully relevant for those of you that have taken a first year econ course.
Yeah.
All right. There's a question here that, oh yes, Grace, did you
Oh
want
no,
to
I was just going to add really quickly. I meant to say this as well before, just adding on to that extra year. I feel like that was extremely daunting for me going in. You're already like, oh my gosh, I'm going into 3 years of law school. Like that's going to take forever. And then now I'm going to do 4 years. It honestly goes by so fast. I had all of those thoughts and I was weighing that option and being like, oh, I don't want to be in school for another year. I've already done my undergrad. Like I've been here forever. It goes by so fast. So like Vivian said, like 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, it already feels like, oh, that extra year was nothing, and I'm only like 6 months out of it. So I wouldn't let that particular point dissuade you too much, even though I know I'm sure that's on a lot of your minds as it was on mine and probably Grace.
So Isabel just has a question. Can I reference research I've done under the Faculty of Commerce in my undergraduate institution in my application? So that's, yes, if it kind of contributes to your answers in the essay questions, absolutely. You can really use anything that kind of influences how you thought about the decision to go to law school or the JD MBA program. If it's relevant to how you want to, how you got to where you were and what's motivating you to want to do the degrees, then certainly you can add it.
The question about what year, does it matter what year you take the GMAT? Does it need to be a certain time before the application?
Oh, that's a good question. Firstly, I would maybe ask like Patricia or Maya to maybe input the GMAT waiver policy for the MBA, for the JD MBA program in the chat so people can take a look. Because like a lot of students applying might meet the criteria for a waiver of the GMAT or GRE. LSAT's not waivable, however. You do need to do that for law school. Now, in terms of, when you want to write the GMAT, I would say many times, like very similar to what Gray mentioned about like LSAT, it's on a case-by-case basis. Do remember these tests, there can be test anxiety associated with these exams because they are done under pressure, right? And at least the GMAT or GRE, they're both computer adaptive courses. So like the test gets harder and harder as you're writing it. Gray's shaking his head because it starts to feel really like really nerve-wracking, like as you're doing better at it. So check out the GMAT GRE waiver requirements for the MBA program, because it might not be a requirement if like you meet certain criteria. Like let's say you have a lot of math in your background or you did extraordinarily well in your undergrad, like it might not be a requirement. LSAT unfortunately is a requirement. And I guess the requirement for when you write it is like make sure you meet one of those deadlines for the MBA program. Anything to add to that, Patricia?
Yeah, for sure. I was actually going to touch base on that because I saw that we're almost at time. So let me just quickly share my screen so I can walk everybody through the admissions process and also the GMAT and GRE waiver. So as I mentioned, like application time, the deadlines are a little different than the JD part. So make sure that you check our website. Oops. Go back. So the final deadline is going to be May 6th if you're trying to join the MBA program in 2025. But usually our application or admissions cycle is from August till the May next year. So you do have a couple months to think about it. And after you submit your documents and everything, if you're shortlisted, you will be invited for an online interview. The interviewers will ask you more questions to get to know you more. And for work experience, if you have some work experience, it will help you understand better of the material of, how the conversations go in classrooms, but no hard requirement required for the work experience. And of course, it's just your transcript, B+, which is 76% for the MBA portion. GMAT or GRE, it will be nice if you have it. I would say it's still required. And if you do meet the waiver requirement, you might be able to get a waiver, but if you want your application to look more competitive, is recommended, especially you're trying to aim for the scholarship, it's recommended if you do the GMAT or GRE. References could be, if you have worked, use professional references. If you haven't worked, maybe use your professors from university. If you have done, you created your business, could be a business partner or anybody that has, who knows how to advocate for you. And also the written and video essays to try to highlight your qualification or try to highlight the skills that you've learned. And if your degree was not done in an English-speaking country, you will have to do the English proficiency tests. And I'll just quickly show the GMAT or GRE waiver requirement. So there's a couple different things that you can meet the requirements. I would say the most common one is if you have 2 or more quantitative courses, so any like pure math related courses. If you do have those courses on your transcript, and if they're also B+ or more, you should be able to get I would say 98%, you will be approved for the GMAT or GRE waiver.
We have one last question from Jared. I know we do have to wrap up though.
Yeah, Jared, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry for the last minute question.
No worries.
Thank you to you all for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I guess my question is, I guess kind of the drift that I'm getting here is that it's 2 separate applications. Like I know, like in the States, some of it is like if you get into like the law school, then you have a better chance to get into the MBA program. I assume that's not the case here. If you guys could speak to that, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, so it is 2 separate application processes. You will indicate you're a JD MBA applicant in both of the Allard applications and the Sauder applications, but you are basically getting into 2 programs, so you have to meet the requirements for both, basically. Patricia, anything to add on that?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't mean that if you get into Allard, you will be automatically, or there's more chance that you'll be getting into the JD MBA. You still have to meet other requirements. But it's nice to let us know that you are trying to join both programs.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we are at time right now, and I would just ask to wrap things up. Maybe Grace and Gray, what is one piece of advice you would give applicants at this stage, considering the JD MBA program?
I think we've mentioned it a couple of times, but I think just taking the time to really think about the 2 degrees and think about as best you can, because I know it's hard at this stage, kind of looking 4, 5, 10 years into the future and considering what you want to do. But for me, not knowing what I wanted to do, and I'm not sure how many of you know what you want to do, it just, the 2 degrees it just seemed kind of the best choice moving forward and to open up as many doors as possible. But I think just taking that time to reflect and before making any of these decisions, leaving yourself enough time to write all the tests should you need to, but take that time to reflect and consider kind of what you want to do with your life, I guess. I'm going to pop my email in the chat. So if anyone is, feel free to reach out with any questions, or we can schedule a one-on-one, but yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, I think similar to what Grace said, and I'll also add my email. Talk to as many people as you can about it, whether that's people that have done it, just your family, talking about your lifestyle, and then also reach out. There's actually not a ton of JD MBAs out there, but there are UBC JD MBAs in Vancouver, and I've talked to several of them before I applied, and I found that's very helpful, especially to talk to people at several different stages of their career. And everyone has been, and I'm sure is very happy to speak to you about it. So I think that's probably the most helpful thing, besides obviously doing well on your LSAT, GMAT, and organizing all of the more technical admissions processes. And then also, I think I kind of alluded to this earlier about don't let the 1 year the one additional year totally dissuade you from doing it. There are financial resources available, there's scholarships, there's aid and all that. So if it is something that you can swing that way, I think, and you have an interest in business, I think it's a phenomenal program. And I'm happy to speak to more people about that. But I encourage everyone to apply if it interests you.
Wonderful. Thank you both. So remember everyone, like the JD application deadline is December 1st, so it's earlier than the MBA deadline. If you guys have any last minute questions before the December 1st deadline that you want to come in and drop in, we do have a virtual session on November 20th. I just put the link in the chat, so you can feel free to register for that. Patricia, I'll let you close the session.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just before we end the call, so from the screen, you can see that we also have 2 upcoming MBA related online sessions. One is next week and the other one is a month later. So you get to hear from our student ambassadors and how they feel in the MBA program. So feel free to take a screenshot or something so that you can join the session. But thank you very much for our guest speakers, for Vivian, and also everybody who joined the call. I hope that you learned something that's valuable, and we look forward to seeing you again in our future events. Thank you very much.